Hi everybody, Rob Redman here from Pro Studios, and this video is another kind of new features of R16, and this one's going to be all about the Reflectance Channel. Now, the Reflectance Channel is a new Reflectance Channel in R16, and it kind of combines what the old Reflection Channel and Speckles did for various reasons. Anyway, it's far prettier, far more powerful. You can actually build entire shaders purely from the Reflectance Channel. You don't need colour bump, any of that, if you don't want to. You can do everything in here, and it's very realistic. So all the materials you see here on my material testing object, they're all done using the Reflectance Channel, apart from this grid, which is just a normal kind of Phong shader. My scene's lit just by an area light, a spotlight, and kind of an HDRI light, and that's it. Now, this render is done with particularly high settings, just because I wanted to really push kind of the quality and see what I could get out of it. And let's kind of jump in and show you how it does it. So you can do things like cloth really very easily using the new Reflectance Channel. So I'm going to bin that out of the way. You can see here I've got my interactive render going on. And that's kind of set maybe 2/3 of the way quality wise. Let's just make a change so you can see how quickly that updates. And this is with GI on as well, by the way, so you can see it's reasonably quick considering it's doing all kinds of things. And this is got multiple layered reflectance materials on it. The kind of anisotropic foil material I've got on the bottom of this object is a bit of a wet render pig, but it's kind of blurry reflections, and it's doing all the anisotropy and everything. And I've also found that doing textiles this way, although they look fantastic, they can take a little longer to render than you might want. So let's have a quick look at this one. This is a kind of a bowling ball. I wanted to build a bowling ball material, and it's actually really easy. So this is a layered material. I have got some colour in here just as a base, and it's a bright pink with a bit of fall off. In fact, let's just turn off the reflection so you can see what I've got. So it's really just this, and it's ugly as hell. It doesn't look realistic, it doesn't look nice, but it does the job as a nice base for our Reflectance Channel. Okay, so how the new Reflectance Channel works is it's a kind of a layered system. You can have just one base layer if you want, and you could do something like the old kind of reflections you used to see, or just a specular highlight, but actually it's nicer to work up, adding different elements as you go. One thing to note is it's usually better off leaving the blend mode as normal for all of these and actually using the layer mask to add in any kind of blending that you want. That gives you more power anyway. You can change the colours here very simply, or you can add a texture. So if you want that kind of Fresnel look that we used to use in previous versions, then you could just go into the texture here and add a Fresnel, just like you used to do. So that's still possible, and you can adjust the intensities, which is another way of just kind of letting things show through. So let's have a quick look at this bowling ball material. So my base colour is this just pink. I've got this kind of pink here, and it's set to full. There's no layer masks going on. I've got no Fresnel going on for this, and layer sampling is just left as default. We'll look at that in a bit more detail later on, but this is really kind of how you're going to maybe speed up your renders or really push the quality. A bit like sampling levels for ambient occlusion or GI. Anyway, so really all the power is in this area here. So roughness is kind of, I'm going to say it's similar to blurriness in the old system. It's really about kind of what the specularity is going to look like. So if I push this back up, you can see really rough, there's hardly any highlight, and you'll see a bit of a change in here. Obviously I've got a shiny coloured gloss over the top, so you're not seeing quite as much of a change in the interactive render as you might think. That's because the glossiness is actually lying on the top. So I'm going to take this back down to, I think at about 7 or 8, maybe 7. Reflection strength, I'm just leaving this halfway. This channel isn't about reflections in the sense that you might imagine. Reflections are really everything you see. What most people think of kind of shininess is the specular highlights. So specular I've got down pretty low. It would be very wide anyway for an Orionaya diffuse. And by the way, just thinking about this, diffuse layers are basically color layers. In other rendering software or other 3D applications, quite often you'll find diffuse is what you know as the color channel. So just think about that as well. Okay, so that's the base layer. Next up, I added some speckles, and this is really quite fun. So my speckles layer is an isotropic type, and I've left the attenuation at average. You can change this so you have slightly different looks, and this is a case of experimenting. Metal's quite obvious. Additive, you get really bright highlights with that. Now for this one, I added quite a lot of roughness. It just seemed to work better for me. You would think less roughness would work for this kind of flex, and this is a little bit like the flex in car paint, except mine are bigger and brighter. You can see here in the preview the flecks are actually really bright. In fact, this preview gives you an even better idea, and they're slightly bigger than car paint flecks. So I've given this a colour, and this is a pale pink, just to really kind of help stand out against but keep the colour scheme going. The rest of the power from the flex comes from the layer mask, and I actually used a star field. It just seemed like the easiest way to get the kind of specs I wanted. I could have played around with clamping on a noise shader, but don't need to with the star field there. Okay, so that was the layer mask, just driving the position of where this speckliness happens, and then again, no Fresnel, no anisotropy in this, and no adjustments to the layer sampling. So next I have the coating. Now I'm going to turn off this top gloss, just because that might confuse what I'm trying to show. So the coating is kind of like the lacquer. This is where the bowling ball has been sprayed with the gloss varnish or whatever, or lacquer. And for this I use the GGX, which is kind of your standard kind of very even gloss coat. Okay, so that fire engine gone past. Again, I've got very low roughness on this. This would make for more blurry reflections. Let's crank this right up, and you can see immediately the reflections are so blurry they may as well not be reflections, and they come back as you drop them down. So kind of 3 or 4. What I would suggest is if you're trying to make a lacquer, it's never going to be 0 roughness. And it's very unlikely that anything will ever be 100% roughness, because this is slightly more kind of physically based. You want to kind of steer clear of pushing things too far. If you're going for realism, that is. If you're going for something a bit more stylized, then yeah, go for it. Reflection strength 100%. I'm driving this via a mask again, so I like to keep that fairly high up. And bump strength again, I'm not doing anything with the bump in any of these materials. If I was going to go and add some more detail, maybe some scratches and so on, then I might use the bump for that. Okay, so what else have we got going on? Layer colour, just white, and that's because this is just a standard reflection layer. It's the layer mask, which is a Fresnel, same as you might think, just a standard Fresnel shader. And this is what gives the really lovely gloss and really kind of nice. Let's just let this render with the roughness turned up a bit. Let's go to, say, 36. Now when this renders now, you're not going to get quite such a smooth glossy look. It really does look rougher. It looks like kind of a frosted material, which, you know, in fact, let's do it in a minute. Let's make a frosted glass and just see how easy it is. Personally, I think it's going to be really easy. Using this new system. So yeah, you can already see that's it's still very reflective. You can see that there's kind of areas of reflection going on. This is also light bouncing off the foil as well. So let's, what's I going to do? Turn the roughness back down, about 5, and we'll turn on our coloured gloss. So the coloured gloss is just a Beckmann material. That's just, the Beckmann gives a very different kind of look to your glossiness than the GGX. Hard to explain, but you'll see just from the preview here, I think you'll probably be able to see what I'm saying. It's very like turning on in the old system. It's like using the specular in the metal mode, so you get kind of bright hot spots. I've got a bit of roughness in here which turns them down. The specular is not particularly high. Layer colour I've turned green, so you can see the green is only showing in certain areas, and it might look like I've got some kind of Fresnel going on there, but actually, and that's only kind of true, the layer mask is actually a galaxy. So the galaxy shader left as it is just by default, and everything else is kind of left as you would expect. So because there's more white in the center of this shader, that gives that kind of slightly Fresnel look, but this will be mapped. So if this ball turns 180 degrees, you'd see much more green than purple or pink, whereas if you were using a Fresnel shader, you'd always get the white areas in the middle facing the camera, because Fresnel is all about fall off angles to angle of incidence from material to camera. So I hope that's explained it reasonably well. I hope I haven't just run through it too quickly. I'm going to just talk about the denim. Now, here we've got one layer, and there's a load of presets that you can use for cloth. All you need to do is add this Irawan woven cloth shader as your type of layer, and you can see just one layer, and this is all 100% brightness. You can turn down the reflection strength if you want, which just makes the highlights slightly less but keeps all the colour information. And the power of this comes down from the layer cloth. So we've got some presets. Blue gabardine for suits, you've got green twill, and various different things. Let's go for a sturdy fabric. Let's see what that looks like. I haven't even looked at this one yet. You can see this is kind of updated here already, and we've got this pattern, and this is kind of the thread pattern, and although it's a black and white map, you're not getting quite such stark results, because when you look at the actual render, you can see that's actually happening really very nicely, and it's very smooth, and there's lots of detail there. Now we can change the scale. Let's half this down to 50% because it's a bit big, so let that refresh. Obviously you can choose different colours for various parts of the thread. I think the specular colour for the weft might be a bit bright. I'm going to bring that down to about there, and I might even bring this one down as well, just to take away some of that harshness. And we'll see when this updates now. It should look way better. And then we have some scattering, and this is, it's hard to kind of explain what this means, but if I change that, you're seeing that the light is being kind of splayed out in it's like a wide specular, and the forward scattering, let's bring this right back down, you can see also as this is kind of the opposite. So let's bring that up, and we should get really tight highlights, so you can barely make them out. Bring them back, and we get brighter highlights. This one is the other way around. If I increase the number here, then you get really blown out highlights. If I reduce the number, then you get less. And we also have some noise here, which just helps it to look slightly more organic. Don't know if you can see in this preview, but there is a little bit of variation across this pattern, and that's increased by the noise, and we can change the strength or the scale. And again, this is kind of the up, so I guess the easiest way to explain this, the warp and weft, is like U and V, or X and Y maybe is a good way of doing it. And you've got an overall scale for the cloth as it's set days. So I've made this way too bright, obviously, but you can see how easy it is to get some really quite cool things going on. Now, as well as using the presets here, you can just use the patterns that you can see here, and set everything else up yourself. Not sure you really need to. Let's go for it. I'll change that anyway. So this is a much more speckly kind of, it's a bigger type of fabric. I think probably like a looser weave. And you could almost get something a little bit similar to this using one of the other shaders, which has been around for a while, but you don't get the detail and the control that you get with this system. Anyway, that's a good place to start, is just by playing around with the presets, is all I was going to say. And I don't do huge amounts of cloth in my renders, but I think now I might do more, as it's very powerful, and the results out of the box are really quite good. So changing this, the fabric looks great. All I'd need to do is change the colours. Really very good. So let's look at one of the other main features, and this is anisotropic materials. So again, I've got just one single layer, and this is an anisotropic layer. Roughness is really where the power comes in this, so at least in controlling the overall appearance. So again, if I reduce this, you get the really very shiny kind of overall glossy looking mirror ball. If I increase it, we get this really kind of blown out, soft, again blurry looking reflections. So I'm going to increase this until it gets to about there. Reflection strength, specular strength, I've adjusted to suit. You could increase that or decrease it. Doesn't make a huge amount of difference, because actually it's the anisotropy that changes this. So there are three controls that we've got here. This is kind of the hot spot. So if this is a softer curve, then you get a more spread out highlight. This is the shape and direction of the anisotropy, and this is kind of the noise preview. So let's have a look at what we've got. So we've got reprojection, radial. I've done this just because it suits this object more. Most of the time you'll probably leave that on none. Let's just open that up again. So we have things for scale, so we can change the scale of the noise there. So you can see this is the pattern, which is, so if we're going for a brushed metal look, we might use a pattern in here, and this is where we change the size of the brush strokes. I'll leave this really big for a minute. This is nearly 800%, and you'll be able to see on the preview in just a minute, as the interactive render catches up, that the scale of the brushes is going to be massive. It's going to be way too big for what I want. Possibly so big you can barely even make out what they are. So you can see there's a little bit of brushing in there, but it really does look quite massive. Much bigger than I had before, although it still looks slightly foil-like, which is quite nice. So let's reduce that back down. You can change the angle, and that's the angle of this. It's kind of the pitch of this thing. Oh, sorry, of this one here. So you can change the direction of the pattern. This one is orientation, so we go down to the scratches. You can have various different types of scratch. You can have circular, which we've got at the moment. Even though it's stretched out, you can have box. This is kind of like maybe if you had checker plate. Lattice, it actually looks a bit like parquet flooring when you see it big. Yeah, you can't see from there. Let's turn this off to just... Right, okay, now we'll be able to see it better. Now I've turned off my reprojection, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about a bit better. So you can have various kinds of scratches. You can have just one single scratch, none, which will just be a flat material. You can have primary and secondary, or primary or secondary. I'm just going to leave it on primary with one scratch. You can mirror these across your UVs if you want to. You don't always want to, you might. I haven't found a reason to yet. So you've got the scale. So now I'm hoping you can see this is the kind of parquet floor look that I was talking about. Amplitude is kind of the difference. It's almost like a contrast control. You can actually, I think, crank that up above 100, so you can really drive some really scratchy materials, which is really good for doing brushed steel. So if you have that kind of like really nice brushed steel that you see on some kettles or toasters and coffee machines, this is a really good way of doing it. Increase the amplitude but reduce the scale. Primary scale is the overall size of your anisotropy, so we might bring that down. So the pattern's the same size, but this is the size of the lines, the actual scratches. You can change the length, so you can have lots of brushing inside each square. I hope you're just noticing what I'm doing here. Primary length, I keep that quite long. I think that works better. And let's go back to where we were. Okay, so hopefully you'll be able to see circular. I'll just change the scale again for you so you can see what's going on. So that's kind of like some nice amplifiers, nice kind of electronic goods. You get that kind of look. And what else was there? There's diagonal, which is, you know, fairly self-explanatory. They all are really, and the back to the lattice. So that's an overall look at how you control these kind of really nice new metals. I'd probably be inclined to scale this back down now. Primary scale. Let's bring that back down. And so that's the other thing to remember. So this is the scratches, and this control here in the middle, this is the anisotropy amount. So this is none, which is going to give you a fairly flat standard highlight, but the more you increase the anisotropy, the more you're going to get that kind of brushed look. I don't really know the technical term for it. I guess anisotropy is. This is how you get that kind of like a glint rather than a solid reflection. An orientation just lets you spin that around, so you can really fine-tune this to your scene or your object, and that's just a simple rotation of the shape you've got in there. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a little understanding of what we've got here. So this was using a radial, or the circular, sorry, the lattice style with quite a tight, narrow anisotropy, and the scale just adjusted to fit here. I'm hoping in the video you can see the specs where I use that star field. I wonder if we can just get a closer look in here. Let's just... My mouse looks weird, it's because I'm using the Cintiq here. Okay, so we've got the scratches there, and hopefully you can just pick out the glinting of the ball there. And hopefully you can see some of the detail in this fabric as well. Obviously there's no credit for me in that fabric. That was pretty much a scaled down version of one of the presets. So that's a little overview of how it works and some of the features, just to kind of get you going and have a think about how you might start building a load more materials. I'm going to be building I have been building a library of new materials, which I'll share at some point. I'll stick them on my blog, so somewhere at the bottom of the page you should see a newsletter sign up to that, and once Cinema 4D R16 is released, then I'll share to all the subscribers. I'll give a big batch of those just as a freebie. So yeah, come back for those. Tomorrow I'll be looking at some more of the new features. I've got a load of these videos recorded, so it would be nice to just show them over the next few days. There's more to come. I'm also planning on doing a really big kind of overall tutorial that it will cover motion tracking, some of the new materials and various other new tools, and I'll show them all actually being used in a project rather than these little overviews where we just look at some of the new bits. So that's quite exciting, and I'll tweet when that's going to be announced. Right, I've been Rob Redman, and I'll see you all soon. Cheers.